Now, another important role of the project leader is to delegate and empower, meaning that you want to find a way to give each team member the ability to achieve and help achieve the project objective. So that what does that mean? Well, it means that and that's not you don't always have all those conditions in place, but you want to make sure that your team members are selected on their ability to perform the tasks that need to be done, and they are empowered to do so. They are responsible for their tasks and for the job. And by the way, again, going back to last week's discussion forum, uh, some of the negatives that you identified, the bad experience, was when you were not able to do the job, for whatever reason. Uh, and that's important. When people feel that they are able to do what they're asked to do, and that what they're asked to do is within their sweet spot, that's a very positive thing. But the next point is important. It's very important to be very clear about what the tasks are. But empowering means, once you tell people what you expect in terms of result, let them decide how they're going to do it. That's empowering, and that that means you have to understand what their capabilities are. So your focus is not in trying to second guess what they do, but in trying to understand upfront what they can do, and then giving them as an assignment the kind of things that they are actually capable of doing. And of course, they have to be accountable for the results. So the next slide is about pushing back. Pushing back is a simple thing. The project sponsor or the client or the higher up that's giving you the job to manage a particular project is pushing for results, is pushing for being on time, for spending less, for delivering on the product, whatever it is, they're pushing for more. You, as a project leader, have to push back because sometimes, and in fact often, the pushing from the sponsor is beyond what the project can deliver. Therefore, your role as a project manager is to push back. And pushing back means identifying ways in which we can, certainly that we can trade off so that, in fact, we can deliver on what the project is supposed to be. So, and if you remember, in last week's desk, I had this um, the rock and the hard place with the project manager in between. In a sense, that's what it is. The top is pushing down and the bottom is pushing up, and you as a project in the middle are pushing back on both sides. So it's important in successful projects, both roles are understood. The sponsor is pushing for more, the project leader is pushing back, not so much for less, but for what can be done within the parameters of the project. So depending on what kind of sponsor or stakeholder who's pushing for more you're dealing with, there are different ways and strategies to push back. Some can be successful, some not. In the forum for this week, I'm asking you for ideas or experiences you've had in pushing back. What works, what doesn't work, and with whom. Again, assuming you've had experience with that, or even if you haven't had any experience, ideas that you may have. Sometimes very difficult to push back against a very powerful superior, and therefore you sort of accept the demand, and even though you know that it will actually jeopardize your ability to deliver on the project. So what are trade-offs? Because that's ultimately what pushing back is all about. It's about effective way to address project constraints. You reduce something in order to get more on something else. The idea is to come up with something that works at the end of the day. So trade-offs are really very important, and that's a way in which you deal with pushback. You know, when you're pushing on one thing, you can say, yes, we can get some of that, but not some of this, and then find some way of trading one against the other. These are critical for reaching alignment. That's the last bullet on that slide. What I call alignment is coming to a point in which everybody agrees that we can defend the solution that we reached. In other words, it's not necessarily your first choice, but the agreement we come to is to a position that you can defend, that you're comfortable defending, even though it may not have been your first choice. Now, most projects somehow are about change. Somehow a project will change the organization in some fashion. It's about doing something differently, bring something into the organization that you didn't have, whatever it is, but projects ultimately are about change, but also a project itself has to handle change. So you create change through a project, but the project itself is constantly managing change because the project team decides to change things, because the customer for the project decides to change things, or because what happens most of the time is that unanticipated events in the course of the project means that we need to change. So the main thing about change in the way we manage the project is that, and that's pretty obvious, the later in the project changes occur, the greater their impact. Therefore, we want to address as early as we can the things that that may lead to significant change in the project, so that we can, in some sense, freeze them. So, managing change is an important function of a project leader, and while on the one hand you do not want to be dogmatic and say things won't change, on the other hand, there's a point in a project in which you can say, look, we are now committed to a particular course of action, and additional changes would certainly jeopardize significantly what the project is. Now, the next slide, I put it in here, and it's not necessarily relevant to all of you, but John Kotter is a former, he's now retired, but he was a faculty member at the Harvard Business School for many, many years, and is the acknowledged foundational author in a lot of the literature that has been produced about change management. In fact, one of his books, in fact, his best known book, is called Leading Change. And here's a simple 8-step eight-step table that he came up with in that book about how to lead change in an organization. So once the decision is made to change certain things, whether it's changing the structure, changing the mission, whatever it is, but a significant organizational change, step one is to establish a sense of urgency. In other words, you have to create an environment in the environment of the organization, a sense that change is urgent, must happen. Then step two is to create a so-called guiding coalition, which is essentially a group of people who are committed to that change and therefore will invest in energy and ideas to make that change happen. It's what he calls the guiding coalition. That guiding coalition will then develop a vision for the change, in other words, a picture of what things will look like when the change is done, is successful, and a strategy to get there. Step four is to communicate that vision. Step 5 is to empower broad-based action, meaning that empower pockets, groups within the organization to, in their own term, implement ideas that are consistent with the vision. So in some cases, there would be small initiatives, in other big ones, but the idea is to, the broad-based is the important thing. Get a lot of units or a lot of groups or a lot of individuals in the organization to actually create their own change based on the vision. And then make sure that you generate gains quickly. This is the whole idea of the low-hanging fruit. Find those things that can produce results quickly so that then it creates a sense of progress, and as a result, help you produce more change. You can then consolidate those gains from those initial success, and that creates more momentum, more change, and ultimately what you have is a whole organization being changed, and then you need to anchor those changes in the organization so that they become part of the culture. So that's that broad framework of John Kotter. I like to share it because sometimes, and some of the projects you are involved in ultimately are the kind of projects that can lead to organization-wide change. And in that sense, it's a good framework to know about and potentially use. Okay. Last, I have a couple more slides. This is about a tool called the Project Charter, which is, as defined here, a relatively short document that defines the fundamentals of the project as it is launched. So its purpose is to ensure great clarity, partnership, address some important consideration in terms of design and trade-offs as we start. And in some sense, it's kind of a due diligence to ensure that the issues that we may encounter are addressed up front so that they don't come up later as a surprise. This is kind of a template that lists the topics that are typically included in a project charter. Background, scope, goals and objectives, strategic fit. How does that project fit with the strategy of the organization or the mission of the organization? Roles and responsibilities. How we're going to approach the project. In other words, kind of methodology there. What milestones, deliverables, assessment of performance criteria, constraints, assumptions, and risk management. As you can see, that list is an elaboration on the startup checklist that I had you work on last week. So, with a deadline of a week from Friday, in other words, the 20th. I would like you to prepare a charter for your project, and that will essentially be elaborating on the checklist that you prepared for this week. And there are some topics in here that you did not or would not have looked at in the startup checklist, so they would be included in here. Again, just as with the checklist, what I want you to do is to do as much as you are in a position to do at this point for your project. And then hopefully it will help you get a better sense of what the project needs, and I'll give you some feedback on that. So the deadline for that is the end of next week. Okay,